Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shades of Entrepreneurship. This is your host, Mr. Gabriel Flores. Today, I'm here with Doug Brown, the CEO of CEL Sales Strategy and a sales revenue and profit growth expert. I'm very excited about this conversation because, folks, you know how much I truly love talking about scaling and creating generational wealth. But before we get too far, Doug, introduce yourself. Who is Doug Brown?
Well, if I knew that, Gabriel, I wouldn't need all that therapy. That right? No, I'm just kidding. Um,
You and me both, brother. You and me both.
First, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate you having me here. I started working at the age of 3, and I worked for my dad's business at the age of 3. I swept floors
Wow.
actually for 25 cents a week, and I loved it because I was around the adults and I got a shiny quarter at the end of the week. And back then you could buy a lot of candy for 25 cents. So I probably went into a diabetic coma a few times when I was a young guy. And I worked my dad's business all the way through when I got out of high school. And then I ended up going into the military. I always had side businesses, growing up. After I got out of the military, I went to college because that's what you're supposed to do. And I was selling music equipment through college. And it was an awesome job because I get to work with all the bands that, many of us at that time were listening to on the radio. And I had my degrees and I decided, well, I'll try a shot at the degrees. And I went and worked for a hospital because I had them in biology and nuclear medicine. And I realized, man, I'm in a business and it's not what I wanted. It's not what I signed up for. I wanted to help people. So I decided to take a sales job for a corporation, and I did. And I became the number one person out of over 300 reps at that company. And during that process, somebody asked me, would I like to be a coach? Because I was helping a coaching company with their telecom services, and I was giving them all kinds of advice on how to grow and scale their business. And I said, well, I used to play some semi-professional soccer. Yeah, that was my response. I didn't even know what the hell they were talking about, Gabriel. And so they said, no, let me tell you what we're talking about. You could be a business coach. And I said, well, that sounds like kind of fun. So I did. And along the path, I helped this guy named J. Conrad Levinson, Gabriel. He was what they called the father of guerrilla marketing. And I helped him grow his business a bit. He introduced me to a guy named Chet Holmes, who wrote a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine. I then asked them, can I be a coach for your company? And they said yes. And I became the number one selling coach within the first 6 months of their business. And that just kind of led on to me working with more and more companies. Eventually, I became the president of training and sales for that company. And then, a small stature figure named Tony Robbins wanted to buy into the company. So I ended up becoming Tony's president of sales and training for those companies for 7 years. And it just kept going. So we worked with thousands and thousands of companies through those things. And that's where I really learned the methodology that I deploy through working with these thousands of companies. And I look for the overlapping things what got them to move from point A to point B? What are the metrics? What are the optimization points? And that's how I ended up, doing what I'm doing today. I know it's a long breathed answer, but I mean, that's how it happened.
No, this is a perfect segue because I love hearing the history of the entrepreneurship growth just so I can dig into it a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and bring it all the way back to age 3. Please tell me, what the heck was your parents doing at age 3 that enticed you to kind of get out there and start working? So what business did your parents have?
So my dad owned an electric motor repair business. So we did, new sales, repairs, industrial equipment, repairs. And I still don't know. All my brothers went through the same path, right? We all started very young. I was thrust out in front of clients by the age of about 5.5 to 6. And I would sit there and write orders and take tags in, as we called them back then. So I was getting orders in. I'd figure out the cost of parts. I would sell these parts. And then I got 25 cents an hour. So it was like, woohoo, I was like really in the dough, right? But what always stuck in my brain was, okay, we just bought a part for $1. We marked it up to $2 and we sold it at $2. And I just sold, say, 11 of them today. So that means I made $11 off these parts. I'm getting paid 25 cents an hour. So if you do the math, I made more selling the parts than I would have, and so I think that concept of leverage kind of kicked in at that point. And all my brothers went through the same path. So I don't know. I never had the chance to ask my dad. He died young. Was this by design, or did you just need low cost labor, or what was it? I don't know. And my mother, she was a nurse, but she sold Avon, and she was very successful at Avon. She made more money in Avon. I don't know why. She loved being a nurse, so that's probably why she stayed as a nurse. But she was always that connector type of person, right? And I remember traveling around with her when I was three or 4 years old, and we'd go to the Avon parties, and people would place their orders, and I'd be putting all these lipsticks in bags, fulfilling the orders, and we would figure out what her commissions were on the product sales. And so again, I think I don't know. I never asked my mother that question either, but maybe they needed a babysitter and nobody would take care of me. I have no idea, but I do know that schooling actually led me into understanding the power of leverage. And I always loved entrepreneurship because I just looked at that as that's freedom, right? Even when I tried to work for companies or corporations, I always tried to pick jobs that had some type of entrepreneurial freedom to it, because I didn't want to be stuck in a cubicle. I didn't want to, have somebody being able to tell me this is what you can only make, those type of things. So yeah, that's how it all happened. And I wish I had the answers to those questions, but I don't. So
No, and I love that your mom, I got to tell you, my mom also dabbled in the Avon world, so I think there's probably, what was the other candle one? I can't remember exactly the candle.
oh yeah, there was yeah,
My goodness, it's Avon Candlelight, and what's the other one with the
and then Mary Kay was the other
Mary
one, I
Kay?
think.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I think it's kind of funny. I always believe that women are like the first true entrepreneurs in the world, right? They're the ones that truly have to do it all, even at the home base sometimes. And so, much respect to your mom and your parents for teaching you at a very young age to do amazing work. Now, not only did they teach you about the business, but then you kind of pivoted. You went from being an entrepreneur to going to education for biology,
Yeah.
nuclear medicine. Very
Yeah.
difficult educationally, mind you. Tell me about that process, and then tell me about your transition. Did you end up going into the healthcare industry, or did you just straight transition into entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So my thought was to be a doctor, right? Because, all my friends thought I was crazy growing up because I had all these side businesses, and we had a body shop, a Christmas tree retailing store, locations. We were dabbling in the flower business. We had a landscaping company. I mean, we just tried all these things. And most of the people that I hung around with, except a couple of my friends who were entrepreneurial, they didn't get it. And the thing is I always had way more money than I needed while I was going through high school or even grade school. And so I loved the fact that if I wanted something, I could go buy it, right? If I wanted to buy something from my family, my mom, my dad, my girlfriend, whatever, I could just go do it. And as I got a little older, I realized even like, I want to have more money than I need, right? Um, I guess we could call that healthy greed,
Yeah.
right? Really, when it comes down to it. So I was looking at maybe becoming a doctor, because as an entrepreneur, especially when you're young, you don't really realize that there's a pathway. Even if you're hanging around with all these people, like my dad had, businesses that, we'd hang out with the CEOs and I'd listen to the conversations, but I never really, we grew in a background from a background that was, we were poor, and then we were middle class, and then we were, slightly above that, right? But it was never like, we never had business entrepreneurial conversations per se. It was always, we worked and we made more money and we could leverage through those disciplines. So I think what happened was, as I was going through that, I was like, man, what am I going to do? Like, you know, and I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs have felt this way because I've talked to them, and they're like, well, I don't know. Could I do that? And then your brain kicks in, well, I can monetize this. I can monetize that. And it's like, well, you know what? In my generation, Gabriel, it was like, you have to get an education in order to be successful. And so I said, you know what? That's what I'll do. I'll go back and get an education. And so I meandered around in the school system for a long time because I couldn't figure out the major I wanted. I was like, well, I'll learn languages so I can communicate better with people, right? And then it's like, well, what are you going to do with languages? You can't have a job just with languages, right? So then it was like, well, what are these hard skills? And I always liked the medical field because I liked helping people. And so I ended up getting my first degree in biology. And I remember my oldest brother, I was walking across the courtyard from the library at the university I went to. And he said, Doug, you've got a ton of credits. What are you going to do with all these things? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I probably should do something. I've got a degree in biology. So, I'll go in the medical field and then I'll go be a doctor. And so I got my degree in nuclear medicine to get my pathway there. It was probably the dumbest thing, but the best thing I've ever done. When it comes to education, because I quickly learned when I got into the hospital setting, like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Right. And the other reason I did that, Gabriel, is because I was still in the military during the time that I was there. And I could be promoted to an officer's rank with the degrees that I had. So that was the other thing, because, if you're putting the same time in, but you get paid twice what you're getting paid, why not? Right.
Yep.
So that's kind of how it came along. And then what I really, really, really wanted to do, this is going to sound like coming out of left field, is I really wanted to be a professional musician.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I discovered that through going through the biology degree because I was taking music courses, minor, and I always played in bands growing up. But then when I took the job selling music equipment, I got to hang around with, members of Aerosmith and Billy Joel's band and Paul McCartney and the Wings and Boston and Jake Isles and, the Eagles. I mean, you're a young guy hanging out with these guys and, it's
All
like,
list of people to hang out with for sure.
yeah. And, and it never occurred to me to ask them for, hey, can I get tickets to your concert? Right. I just never thought about it. Like, can I come backstage? And, like I'm hanging out with these guys, selling them gear. And, that's what I wanted to be. And, but I was like so confused during those, like many people are when they're in their early, late teens, early 20s. Right. Or, and so I said, you know what, I'm going to get something that's stable. And that's what I did. And then I came out of that with $20,000 in student loan back then, which was a lot. And I realized this is not what I want to do. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll go back and be a musician. And then I was talking with Barry Goodrow from the band Boston, right? And Barry said to me, Doug, you're a great musician. And we're going on tour now, and we're going to be on the road for 300 days this year. And I said, in a bus? He said, yeah. And I went, I don't think I want to do that. I don't want that as my life. I want a family and things. So then it kind of furthered like, okay, let's find something more stable. So Barry's like, why don't you just go to music school? And I said, all right, I will. So I went to Berklee College of Music and I got in. And so, I continued my education. And so out of all of that kind of spun out like, okay, you love to communicate with people. You love to help people. You love to move people because that's what music was all about, moving people emotionally, right? And looking at all of these things, I was like, you know what? I was successful in selling music equipment. I was successful in other disciplines. I was successful in my dad's business. Why not give this thing in sales a try? And that's what happened. And that's when I ended up in a corporation that I was the number one rep out of the, I think there was 323 reps or something. And I was selling so much, Gabriel, that the CEO called me one day and said, "Hey, do you want a $450,000 a year job?" And I was pretty flattered. You know what I mean? Like, I was making a good six-figure income at that point, but 450, that was like, woo,
Yeah.
like, so, and then I learned like, okay, this is the ultimate leverage tool. And so if I can take that and apply it to business and teach businesses that you're not in X business, you don't sell, laser guided, things for whatever, or you don't sell, you're not in the business of medicine. You're not in the business of manufacturing. You're not in the business, you're in the business of sales. And you just happen to be manufacturing a product that you deliver. Right. And so I started looking at business that way. And then I started helping companies, and I started coaching for that, for Chet Holmes. And then I was helping companies on my side, on my own on the side. And I was like, okay, well, if we take this and we look from point A to point B, what do we got to do to get from point A to point B? And so what I did is I started creating this whole methodology, which is we just need a series of 11 things that we do in a business in order to get predictable, reliable, and manageable revenue growth. And I just kept duplicating these things over and over. And man, I had great results with these things. So that's kind of how it started, the process started and how it evolved.
One of the things you keep mentioning, which I'm very intrigued to dig into, leverage. Tell me more about how do you define leverage, and what do you mean when you're talking about leveraging business, and how does that, how have you leveraged it in a way that you continually to progress forward?
Yeah. So I first learned about this. I was reading an article that said, you remember the Budweiser horses? I don't know if you
Oh
remember
yeah,
them.
the old Clydesdales.
The Clydesdales,
Yeah.
yeah. And I was like reading this, and it said, well, one Clydesdale can pull, like, I can't even remember, like, I don't know, 10,000 pounds or whatever it was, right? I don't know what the number was. It was some, big number, certainly a lot more than I could pull. I can tell you that. Right?
I can
And
pick
so
myself up in the morning.
that's, some days I have that issue. Oh, it's like, how do I get 170 pounds out of bed? But it pulled this, let's say it could pull 2,000 pounds. I don't know what the number was, but then it said, well, if you have 6 Clydesdales, like they had pulling the Budweiser thing, it wasn't like 6 times 2,000 or 12,000 pounds. It was like 60,000 pounds. And I said, well, it's a principle of physics, right? When it really comes down to it. And because I had a degree, sometimes connecting the dots back, because I had a degree in nuclear medicine, I had to do nuclear physics, and I had to do all these physics courses. And I was like, okay, so if you have a lever and a pulley, and I'm thinking back to all this stuff, I'm like, why can't we apply the same concept to business? In other words, if I'm going to make a sales call, for example, right? And I do this all the time. I ask people, what do you want out of a sales call? You're going to make a call? What do you want? And they say, I'd like a sale. And I say, makes sense. What if you don't sell it? Well, then I hang up. What else do you want out of the call? Do you want to be positioned as an expert so you can ask for referrals? Do you want to possibly find a cross-sell opportunity within the organization you're calling? Do you want to make a friend? Do you want to get involved in a networking aspect? Do you, and I would just keep going on and on. What are the 6 or 7 things that you want out of everything you do? Because imagine if you could make a phone call, make the sale, get a referral, be invited to a networking event where there's more, apex decision makers in that networking event. So we're expanding the sale, potentially increasing the buying frequency. All of these things you can do from one action. That's leverage. And so, why not go into let's say we're selling corporate sales, and why not go into a corporation? Like, some of my clients that I've sold to have been Procter and Gamble, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Intuit, things like that. Well, Procter and Gamble has so many locations everywhere, Gabriel.
Yeah.
They don't even know they have locations. Like I worked with a place in Louisiana and there was another one 90 miles away in Texas. They didn't even know that it existed. Right. But what if, like I did with Enterprise Rent-A-Car and Procter and Gamble and other companies, you start with 1 or 2 or 3 locations, and then you end up with the whole state, and then you end up with the state next to it, and then you end up with the region, and then you end up in, another region in corporate, in St. Louis at the headquarters. Why not build that into our plan as leverage immediately, as a strategic objective? So I look at leverage as what are the strategic objectives that you get out of every single thing that you're doing. And most people don't do that. It's instead of they look at it a 1-for-1 relationship. I look at it as a compounding potential interest relationship.
Oh, I like
And
that.
so, and that's what we teach people to do.
I think one of the things you mentioned, the compounding relationship, I always tell people, I work in healthcare. So healthcare is a very unique industry in the fact that doctors and the nurses, right, the healthcare professionals don't necessarily want to talk about the revenue piece of the healthcare, right? Because their focus is really, supporting patient care. However, it's the administrative CEO, COO, right? They're the ones really focusing how do we build revenue. And so one thing I always talk about, and I really like the way you said it, is I really focus on building relationships, right? Because to your point, my end goal is to get a referral, to get a complex referral case. I want a heart transplant from your community, right? But like as Doug mentioned, well, what happens if I don't get that heart transplant? What else is my ask? I just drove 4 hours away to have lunch with this doctor. What else am I wanting to do, right? And I really like that piece because that's kind of like it starts my sales funnel, right? Okay, my ultimate goal is for them to be a loyal consumer, right? And send me referrals. And now I have a influx of, complex surgical cases. Well, okay, well, what's the one above that, right? Well, if you start from the very top, I'm just trying to create awareness of what I'm doing, right? Becoming, like Doug mentioned, trying to be the subject matter expert in that region. So if they're not going to send in referrals, oh wait, but you know what? One of my colleagues is actually needing some of your guys' service. Would love to talk to you, one of your complex surgeons. Right? So I always look at business as it's like chess. Like I'm playing chess for every move. I'm trying to set myself up for the next move. But the end goal is monopoly. I want to own the whole damn board, right? And it's like the way you build the relationships and the value streams you created is important. And I'd be interested to understand, one of the things you mentioned. Let's go through the process of a sales call. Your goal ultimately is to get a sale, but for those individuals at home that are listening, with that mindset in mind, what would you encourage them to kind of start thinking of, or questions maybe you should start asking on that phone call, or maybe even other objectives of that phone call that these individuals should start thinking about versus just thinking about only the sell?
Yeah, I think we start with the objectives first, because the objectives then lead to the questions that we ask, right? And so, if somebody's making a cold call, firstly, I just want to step back 1 sec. The purpose of a cold call is not to make a sale. The purpose of a cold call is to get to the next step of the process, right? And that's another mistake that people make. They're trying to close a deal on the first
Everybody was
call.
taught that ABC, right? Always be closing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The Glenn Ross thing has kind of gone sideways, and faded from today's way of doing selling. Because, now information is so prolific that frankly, marketing and sales are no longer separated. And please, no hate mail, folks, on this, but
It's true.
the reality is it's never been separated, but it was divided.
There you go.
Right. So, I was in the military, and I worked in the at one point in the artillery, right? So I look at I also hung out with everybody else in the infantry as well. So, the infantry runs out into the field with the artillery gives them air, gives them firepower coverage, right? Well, that air coverage or the firepower coverage, that's marketing, right? The people go out on the field, those are your salespeople. So if we have a mismatch between those two things, bad things happen on and in business the same thing. And so I would ask, what are your objectives first? And one of your objectives must be to make sure that we're actually talking to the real true apex decision maker, not just a title. And so if the objective is to get to that person, then regardless of who you're talking with, that's one objective you want to get. Like you just said, you wanted maybe a referral, right? The second thing is that I would say as an objective is, how do you want to be positioned? We want to look at our positioning. Do we want to be positioned as an expert? Do we want to be positioned? And by the way, the answer is yes, you do. There's really no, but do we want to be positioned? Let's say that we're dealing with a highly Catholic hospital or something, right? That's going to be handled slightly differently than say a hospital that they're known for just aggressive profitability, right? So that's another objective. How do we position for that? How do we position for, as you said, referrals? I like to position for not just one referral, but multiple referrals.
Yep.
And I would like to find out if there's any other opportunities within the organization. So internal expansion or external expansion.
Yep.
So all of these things I would advise people just to write them down. Now, when you first write them down, it's going to feel potentially a little clunky because, they're not used to it, Gabriel. And from there, then you could start to, weave in your questions into the conversation. Simple one on referrals would be, do you have other departments or divisions that are potentially also could use these, having these type of challenges or looking for these opportunities? And if they say yes, well, that opens you up for the next question.
Yep.
Right. So I would map it out, put down the objectives, and then I would map out some of the questions. And here's a little thing for everybody. When you're mapping out questions, you're looking for a yes state answer. So don't ask a question that's an obvious no, right? Because what you're really looking for them to is go, sure, yeah, yes, right? We're trying to remember, we're moving from step A to B to C to D. And the other thing that you're always wanting to do is in your questions, please ask yourself this question. Is this going to make them go, whoa, yeah, wow, I want to hear a little more of this? Or, so what? Heard that 20 times, because if you're asking questions on the latter, then what ends up happening is you're actually depleting your opportunity to get to the next level.
Yep.
So again, these are little points of leverage, Gabriel, right? Along the path. And this is not manipulation. This is pre-planning.
Yep.
Right. And so that would be what I would recommend. Start with the objectives, and then that's when you want to, sit down, write out some questions, and put it to the test. Am I possibly going to get a yes state out of this? Am I going to lower the buyer's fear and increase the buying confidence? Am I going to have them raise their eyebrows out and go, whoa, I would like to hear more about that? Or are they going to go, yeah, so what, kid, right? And that's how it all starts.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so folks that are listening, let me put this in a practical sense for you into my own specific industry in healthcare. So very much what Doug's saying. So the top of my funnel, the top of my sales/marketing funnel is the awareness piece. So what am I doing? Now my end objective at the end of my funnel, my goal is to either increase the referral volume with the community, to create an integration with that community, right? So I either have like some actual either collaboration or strategic partnership, or lastly, how do I actually employ the physicians that are in that community? So again, those are three objectives I'm trying to get to, right? To create a loyal relationship. So the top one is the tactics I'm doing to understand the community is traveling CME programs. So I'll go out and say, hey, by the way, I have an expert that talks about heart transplant. Would love to come to your community, talk about it. We'll provide a credit. It's free to your team. So that's the value, right? A free credit. Because again, these healthcare providers need this educational credits. Now, during that time, as Doug mentioned, I'm also identifying who is actually asking questions during those traveling CME conversations, and then post conversation, who's referring to that program, right? So now I'm starting to see, okay, now those folks that they're referring, those now go to my evaluation step. Right now, it's very important that I do not leave the awareness stage and go to the evaluation stage until I have met the needs of the community. Because once I get into the evaluation stage, I'm going to start asking questions that are going to benefit my system, no longer benefit yours. But so it's imperative that I first acknowledge and represent and help support the community needs. Now, the evaluation and then the marketing piece on that stage is going to be like flyers and fact sheets and newsletters, right? Now, when you go to the evaluation piece, no longer am I doing education. This is actually in-person, one-on-one conversations with the provider. Because to Doug's point, I have now identified during the CME phase, I've identified who is the apex, who is the decision maker, right? So now I'm actually having meetings in the evaluation stage with the decision maker. So the marketing side, what are they doing? Well, they're no longer doing flyers and fact sheets, but now they're actually getting market data for me. How many patients actually live in that community? How many people are insured? How many patients do our insurance cover? How many people actually travel out the community for care? What hospitals do they go to? And so we're getting a lot of information and insight, because it's also imperative for us to understand, is the juice worth the squeeze? Okay.
Yep.
Now, the next section, once we've identified an opportunity, okay, so the next section is conversion. Now I want to convert you from a referring provider to, okay, now we've identified an opportunity to do a shared patient model, right? Or a collaboration or something. So that's that conversion stage. Now, once I've done the conversion stage, that's where the contract people come in. The marketing piece kind of goes away at this point for this stage, because again, this is going to be more contracts, more conversations, intertwining things. Now, don't get me wrong, marketing will be a piece of it, because obviously if we're doing an integration, they're going to want to know, hey, how can we use the brand, right? What's the brand guidelines, so on and so forth. But that's more of a conversation like, here's what you get with the relationship versus how is marketing going to intertwine with that conversation. And the last piece is the loyalty. So once we solidify this relationship, now I have a shared patient model. Now it's about me recurring, going back to that community. Hey, how are things going? How are we doing? Making sure that they have access to, whatever needs they do, continuing to build up that value proposition. Now, folks, again, I tell you this, this is the strategy I use. I've been in healthcare for over 22 years. This sales/marketing funnel is transferable to almost every business. You just need to change your tactics and your objectives a little bit, right, to align with yours. Like Doug was mentioning, the marketing segmentation piece is also important. The message that's going to go to the apex, the decision maker, is going to be different than the message that's going to the gatekeeper, right? The gatekeeper is the person that you have to actually work with them to schedule the time to meet with the providers or meet with the clinic or so on and so forth. The message with them is going to be much different than the communication I'm giving to the providers, right? And so also understanding what message you're going with, because again, you have to create value for the gatekeeper, right? The person that's going to let you into those meetings. What's the value to them in their entire clinic, in their community? That's what you're focusing on. Then when you get into the provider side, now it's like, what is the value to me and my patients specifically? How are you going to make it easier for me to offload these complex cases? Are you going to communicate back? The last thing I want to do is send a patient to you and they're upset about the care that they give. So it's really about creating that loyal, and that's what essentially creates a loyal referring provider on my kind of industry. Again, it's transferable, the marketing sales funnel, just making sure that I really like what Doug said, starting with your objective first. So you have to know what is my true north? What am I trying to accomplish? And then start to think about, how can I get there? To Doug's point, you might get a no at the beginning. You might get a couple of no's. but you got to keep on figuring out what's the value proposition to get you in front of those individuals. So then you can kind of start having the yes conversation, the yes dates, right? The yes dates conversations, so I really do like that process and that strategy, especially Doug, I would love to hear your kind of sense. Do you use like a sales and marketing funnel, and do you feel they are transferable to an extent across all industries?
Well, we're selling to people. So, anything that relates to one person can be transferable. What changes is the messaging and sometimes the delivery of the messaging, right?
Yep.
So as you said, if you're dealing with the CEO or you're dealing with the person who's answering the phones, it's a different message, right? And sometimes people have a hard time remembering this, Gabriel. So what I always tell people is like, look, let's say that you are, I don't know, a 17-year-old male and you are trying to date, I don't know, Tammy, right? And Tammy's this apple of your eye and you want to go out with her and she accepts the date. Now you've got to go pick her up at her home and you're going to meet Tammy's mother and father. You better not use the same messaging you're using on Tammy with mom and dad.
Oh, that's a great analogy. That's a phenomenal analogy. I like it.
Right? Because dad's apt to grab you by the hair and say, you're not taking my daughter anywhere, right? And the mom might even be more, so we are dealing with people when we're selling. And what I loved about what you have is you have a system, and a system is transferable, right? It doesn't matter what country you're in. The values and culture might be a bit different, but always systems can be used and transferred. And that's a form of leverage because you take something that's already working. And, since you're in the medical field and I was in the medical field, I can concretely tell you that, if you're going to put in from a technician standpoint, you're going to put in an IV, right? You're going to, what we used to call thread the needle into the arm, right? Thread the needle. If you're going to do that, it does not matter what country you are in. People's veins are all going to act the same way.
Great
right?
point.
So the same thing applies to the systems that you were talking about. And, we're constantly looking in that system for how do we expand it? What is the optimization points? You had mentioned like loyalty. So then the question is, when you build that loyalty, how do you expand that? Maybe you put together another event, but you have something there, or maybe someone else is running that event, putting it together, and you're getting the leverage of their energy and their efforts, but it came out of the first thing that you were doing. And if you don't know about your messaging or you don't know about the system, if you're measuring these things and looking at the data, the metrics, then what happens is the math will tell you a story. And so, especially with messaging, because there may be some overlapping messaging between a CEO, between a physician, between the person who enters the front desk, between the IT person, right? That they all collectively care about. And once you understand that, if they're all in the same room, you can bring that point or points up and everybody will be going, yeah, that applies to me. So we want to pay attention to all of that within the system. But what I love, Gabriel, is, and most people don't have, is you have a well-defined system. So yeah, it's transferable.
Yeah, I gotta be completely transparent. I built this at like referral funnel probably like 3-4 years ago now. And it has been absolutely a godsend for our organization, to the point I actually created a one-pager. It's kind of a target readiness strategy. So essentially, it'll look at all of our patient service areas, right, our markets, quote unquote, and it'll say where are we at on the sales funnel, right? Are we at the awareness stage, or at the evaluation, conversion, or loyalty, and then where do we want to go? And so every quarter we come back and we look at that one pager. Hey, have we moved from the awareness to the conversion or evaluation stage yet? If so, what has happened? If not, what has happened? And to Doug's point, looking at data is going to help you. Now, data will never give you what you want, but it'll always give you what you need, right?
Yeah.
Data should be used as directional. but it's still the salesmen, the individuals that are boots on the ground that are going to provide that additional insight. So let me give you another example from the healthcare perspective. We use claims data. Well, claims data is only processed once every 6 months. So there's a bit of a 6-month lag. So let's say, for example, I'm looking at data. I'm like, oh man, I noticed this clinic is no longer referring to me. Oh, what's going on? I better get over there. Well, if I had been doing my due diligence and being in the community, I would have known that a provider 6 months ago that was loyal to our system either retired or left the organization or whatever it might be. So I already have that insight. So the data shouldn't be as surprising to me, right? However, it is directional. So it's going to help you determine, are my strategies and outreach strategies working? Are marketing tactics working? Or do we need to pivot? Right. And then also creating that KPIs, key performance indicators for your marketing and for your sales, just so you kind of stay on track for where you're going, right, is going to be really important. Now, Doug, one thing I don't think I have yet to ask you this. What you went through nuclear school, you or nuclear med school, and you went through biology. What was your actual first entrepreneurial endeavor? It seemed like, you kind of went up to the court. I would say first entrepreneurial endeavor after all the healthcare work.
So, so when I decided to leave the world of the medical field, and I took that job, it was in the telecommunications sector. And I met a gentleman, his name's Richard Minervino. Richard was about 35, 40 years older than I was, but he was super successful. Right? I mean, he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And I met him and I explained to him who I am, what I do. And he said, why don't you come by my office and let's talk once a month or something like that. So I would drive literally 2 3/4 of an hour to get there, sit with this guy in his nice 1,800 square foot office, and we would just have business conversations. And he told me a story that he said, when he got out of the military, and I think I reminded him of a young him, when he went up, 38 years prior to, right? And and he said, I had a mentor, and my mentor told me this. He said, I want you to look up in the sky. What do you see? He said, clouds. He said, cool. What come from clouds? Rain. Okay, so how does rain come down? He said, what do you mean? He said, like the rain, does it just pour out in one big bucket? He said, no. He said, well, it comes down these little drops. And he said, okay, now I want you to think of these drops as a penny here, a dollar there, a quarter here, $5 here. And he said, I want your job to be in an entrepreneurial world for you to create as many raindrops as you could possibly drop down. And then I want you to live in Portland, Oregon, where it rains most of the time during the year, that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And he said to me, he said, Doug, you're going to always do well, but if you really want leverage in your life, you want to create recurring income. And he said, so you think about it, anytime somebody picks up a telephone, I get paid. And you can too. So, and he said, you're already doing this for a corporation. You're selling 3 to 5 year contracts. They're keeping the contract. You're getting paid one time. How would you like to get paid for the next 5 years? And so what I did is I entered into the telecom business as my first thing, and I called it Telecom Auditing Group. And I audited phone bills, and I became an agent for that industry. And what ended up happening, Gabriel, is in my first 15 months, I ended up generating almost $1 million in sales, which I was getting 20% recurring income. And so I think it was like, excuse me, like $194,000 a year in recurring income on top of my salary. So I was like, well, this is pretty good. Maybe I should do this. And that was my next entrepreneurial venture. And I had that company for 5 years and then had moved on into the training space with Chet Holmes and Tony Robbins. And that income kept paying me for 11 years after that, and when I stopped. So that was my next my next foray into an entrepreneurial world. And then, I just had invested in different things and trying to get the recurring to continue, whether it was real estate or whatever it might be. Because one thing Russ Whitney always taught me was you make your money in business, but you park it in other avenues, other investments. It's kind of like the Robert Kiyosaki thing, right?
Yeah.
Which, I mean, Russ owned 38% of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So that's probably, he probably taught Kiyosaki. I have no idea. But that's where I've always tried, my next venture. And then any other venture I look into, I now especially ask, if I'm going to do something, how do I get the leverage out of this that I'm doing for long term versus short term? So that was the next step.
I really like that concept, because the way I kind of look at revenue too, I think of it as like a big lake, right? My bank account is a big lake, and essentially I'm trying to create streams of revenue to maintain that level of water, so I can use the boat and the jet skis in the summer, right? And have those opportunities. Yep. And I really like that process. And then, creating that, folks, like it shouldn't be a shock. I started this, podcast 3 years ago. Before I even started recording, I intentionally went and got the Shades of Entrepreneurship trademarked. I went and got the Shades of E trademark, because the goal when I'm building out this podcast, so hopefully a larger organization, YouTube or whatever it is, if you guys want some money, hey, I'm happy to license out this podcast. You can use the Shades of Entrepreneurship brand, right? Because again, the value and the consistency of the conversations, the value of the content that we bring on, like Doug, really remarkable guests that have a lot of experience and free education for everybody that's listening, right? And so I'm trying to build this up in that way. And then same thing with the nonprofit. The nonprofit, as I mentioned, I'm not sure, Doug, if I mentioned this yet, we have a nonprofit, Latino Founders. Our goal is to help scale 100 Latino businesses here in the Pacific Northwest to $1 million recurring revenue in 5 years. We've raised over about $600,000. We have a 10-week business agnostic business accelerator program. We also have a pitch competition. Now, our pitch competition, it's once a quarter in different locations. So for example, folks, we had one earlier this year in Bend, Oregon. Now the winner of that location, we call it a community pitch competition. We gave out $10,000 in unrestricted grant funding at that event. However, the winner of that event was invited to pitch Portland a couple of weeks later, where we gave out $30,000 of unrestricted grant funding. And again, the goal is to kind of create synergy and collaboration across our communities. Our county lines tend to be a divider for a lot of states. And so we're really trying to cross-pollinate our communities through this accelerator program and through the business program. But to Doug's point, the way I'm building that thing, we're building it so we can scale it nationally or internationally, because I want to be able to come back 5, 10, 15 years later and not be running the show, but still be able to look back and see this going, right? And so how would you recommend, there's a lot of folks out there that I feel like this is kind of the advice time, right? What advice would you give to an aspiring entrepreneur, or somebody that they're unsure if they should be making the step? What kind of advice would you give them?
Whether they should be getting into entrepreneurial?
Just more advice on being being a successful entrepreneur.
Oh, well, don't expect it's always going to be easy.
That's very true.
It's not. I mean, here's the thing about free enterprise. A lot of people argue the fact that it's ruthless is why it works. So my advice would be, always think about this equation. Money in, money out equals something. And you always want that equals something to be a positive. And so many entrepreneurs, they don't think about this concept, Gabriel, and they end up burning their runway. So what does that mean? So let's say, you had mentioned a $10,000 and then maybe $30,000. Let's say somebody won those two things and they have $40,000 to work with. And their burn rate is now $44,000. They got 10 months. Okay. So every month, if money's not coming in, there is 4,000 going out. And in 10 months, there's no more money. And most entrepreneurs don't think like this. They think like, oh, well, I'll have that big sale coming, or I'll help this. So when you look at the money in, money out equation, I want people to think short, 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 medium, long. Short, short, short. I call it SSSML, right? And what does that mean? Go after short wins when you're starting out, especially, or you're at the beginning of the month. Get some money through the door. Don't always work on long-term projects unless you have the cash to carry it, because money will be going out. Like whale hunting, for example, it's very expensive to hunt very super large accounts. And those accounts take a long time, right? I mean, I have NASCAR as a client that we had under our belt, and it took us 28 months
Wow.
to get NASCAR to do business with us. So we had money going out through that whole process, but we had a business that could sustain that. So I would always look at that metric, especially if you're a solo entrepreneur or a founder-led sales company. And the next piece of advice I would say is, how do you actually get something done if you don't have to do it? So you want to leverage yourself through other people and other systems and other processes. Because one of the mistakes that people make in entrepreneurship is that they have their grip so tight on something, Gabriel, on the pulse of things, which is fine, but it's so tight that they're restricting the growth because they don't trust anyone else. So if we set up systems and process that give us feedback, like you're saying, hey, in 10 years, I don't even want to be there per se. I'll be maybe the figurehead, or I'll be one of the guys that, is proud that this happened.
Exactly.
But I want the community to flourish, and there's going to be other people. And folks, here's the upside news. There are people who are a lot better at the stuff you don't want to do.
Yes. Very true.
Right. And so again, money in, money out. I could fix my own plumbing in the house, but it might take me 2 days to do something that a plumber could walk in and charge me, $500 to do. And they get it done in an hour. Well, I just saved myself 2 days worth of. Now, what if I took that and prospected for a new client and ended up, getting a client at, I don't know, $80,000, right? I'm better off 80,000, pay him or her $500.
Yep.
So you might have to, give up some things in the company that, because I find too many entrepreneurs hold on to, I got to have 100% of all of this. And, 100% of a small number, if that's your goal, that's fine. But if your goal is to build something bigger, then you're probably going to have to give up something to get there. But when you remember money in, money out, we were talking earlier about VCs, right? Venture capital is not always the right play for a company.
Yes, correct.
Right. And so, in fact, it could be the absolute worst nightmare that somebody actually does, because venture capital people are looking for a multiple return as fast as they can get it.
Correct.
So, folks, if you're going to take money from someone and it's not clear, trust me, they want it back quickly.
Yeah.
Just as you probably would.
Yeah.
Right. So, so you've got to be prepared for very high, rapid growth, or the VC firm will take over your company.
Yep.
And because they want their money. So, I think everything we're talking about, Gabriel, those are a couple pieces of advice, but the main thing that we do with everyone who walks through our doors as a client here is we get them truthfully clear, not subjectively, objectively clear on what is the real goal that we're trying to do. Because entrepreneurs think that they can monetize every little thing on the planet, every Christmas tree bulb on the tree. And you know what? They can. That's the problem. Right?
They can.
But that's the problem. And I say it's a problem because there's only 3 or 4 bulbs on that tree you actually should ever be monetizing to get yourself to probably $100 million in revenue. But if we're so focused on so many lights, then that money out goes out faster than the money comes in.
Yep.
So I would say a very truthful, clear plan, short term, with the idea of entrepreneurial eye in the pie, happy ears, for the future. But let's focus on the next 12 months. What are we doing on the next 12 months? Because then you get there and then you focus on the next 12 months. Of course, you can have a vision for the bigger future, I'm not trying to say you can't, but if you're projecting out 15 or 20 or 30 years, there's so much stuff that happens.
Oh yeah.
If anybody doesn't believe this, I'm going to say one word: pandemic.
Yeah. I was going to think the same thing.
All right. And, regime changes, presidential elections, all of these things affect different things. And so if you're out 15 years, it's nice to have a vision, but don't please understand that that vision that you have is probably going to not be the same path you're thinking about today in most cases. So that's why you want to have a clear, truthful goal, because you can build a plan around that, Gabriel.
Yep, I agree. And I really love what you mentioned about the burn rate calculator. Folks, if you have not, or if you're not using it, even in your own personal finances, use a burn rate calculator. And what it essentially will say is, if you were to stop making revenue today, how long can your business last? And then also think about the not necessarily think about vertical integration as well when your organization. We're talking to a local entrepreneur here in the Portland area, and they source water from a spring. I'm like, okay, well, I want you to think about you outsource the truck driver. So what is the cost of actually owning a truck? What's the cost of you hiring the truck driver? What happens if that private spring runs out of water, or if the owner, okay, where are you twisting, right? Where are you pivoting to? And so understanding all those variables are important, because as Doug mentioned, the VCs, their goal is scale and sell, right? However, having an exit strategy, because again, it's either out of necessity, because a life-changing moment happened, you got sick, or your partner passed away, or whatever the case may be, right? Having those nuts and bolts in place are going to allow you to have a better exit. Because one thing I'm starting to learn is, as founders and entrepreneurs, we overvalue our company quite a bit sometimes.
Oh God, yeah.
And then once we actually go to the evaluation and we see what it's valued at, we're like, whoa, that's much lower than I anticipated. But you really want to make sure some of these things are in place. And to Doug's point, sharing the policies and procedures. I use ClickUp. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with it, but essentially all of our documents, all our policies and procedures, our onboarding, our executive committee search, finances, all of that's on ClickUp. Right. So the beauty of it is it might be on a shared drive or somewhere else, but I'll embed that document there, and then I'll let them know exactly where that document lives, who the owner is, and when it was last updated. Because again, on a yearly or quarterly basis, I want them to come back and check some of those policies out to make sure we're still aligned. Because as Doug mentioned, there might be a regime change, and some of those work policies might change, right? Like we've recently seen. And so the 2008 real estate crisis was another big changing point in all our lives. There's a lot of things that occur that you can't plan for, to Doug's mention, that 10, 15-year pipeline. But if you're doing, 1 year sprints, we're actually working right now and doing some sprints for the nonprofit. And kind of to Doug's point, one of the first things I identified is, what is actually the best return on investment? What sprint should I be focusing on first? And guess what we said, Doug?
Sales and recruitment, I hope.
Dang right we did. Marketing and sales. We got to get out there and build it out. Now, don't get me wrong. We have sprints that are kind of running like a parallel universe. So we're making sure, the website's up to date, and the policies have been reviewed. But at the end of the day, if we're not making any sales and we're not marketing, nobody's going to know what the heck we're doing, and we're not going to make any revenue, and
I was in Los Angeles at an event. I don't know if you know who Jay Abraham is. Jay was a kind of a famous consultant of consultants years ago. And this was like 20 something years ago. I was at this event, and Jay did something brilliant. He like invited entrepreneurs up who have been having some success or have some challenges, and they get at the microphone and they say, this is how I built my $17 million company. This is how I built my $10 million company. This is how I built my $5 million company. And to my dismay, the audience was like, oh, I've had enough of this. And I'm like, I'm writing all this stuff down, Gabriel. Like, oh my God, geez, what, gold here, right?
Yeah.
But the next lady up said, I have this nonprofit organization here in Los Angeles. We feed homeless. We do this, we do that. We've got 200 and something people that's in this organization. And Jay said, well, what's your challenge, or what are you looking for? And she goes, well, we're damn near out of business. And he said, well, tell me. And she said, well, I can't really pay the bills. I've got this going on, that going on, this going on, this going on. And he said, well, why are you doing this? Well, it's the mission. And he said, well, here's what you want my advice. She goes, yes, cut half your staff and make yourself profitable, and then build a sales team to go out and start selling for your organization. She goes, I can't do that. He goes, then you'll be out of business within 3.5 months.
Yeah.
So you're highly intelligent for focusing, not just for this, but for many things. But in business, remember, we started this conversation off, right, Gabriel? You asked that question. It's like, what business you in? You're in the sales business. All businesses are in the sales business. Microsoft is in the sales business of selling computer software and computer hardware, right? And other things. But most people, when you say, well, what business you're in, they'll go, well, I'm in the software business. I'm a chiropractor. I'm an attorney, right? I'm in the law business. No, if you don't have patrons walking through the door that you got to represent and they're paying you money, you can still have your law degree, but you're not going to be a practicing lawyer. I mean, it's that simple. So no matter what business we're in, we must focus on that particular issue. And I'm so happy because the number one thing that nonprofits have challenge, cash flow.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, we're like, again, to your burn rate calculator, we start looking at the burn rate calculator. Okay. If we're getting no grant funding and raise no money, we got a 7-month runway, right? We brought in an executive director. And to your point, we've had opportunities to scale beyond the Pacific Northwest, but I have been cautioned because, again, operational costs. Now I'm starting to do cost analysis for our events. Okay, what does it truly cost to run a pitch competition?
Right.
The vendors, the catering, the venue, all the time we actually spend pitch coaching these individuals and getting them ready. Well, if I were to do that across the country, okay, well, now I'm adding air flights, all these other things. And I still want to give out, the crux of it is to give out unrestricted grant funding, right? So then I'm starting to think, okay, well, if I do this outside of the state, I'm going to need X amount of money in order for it to just be viable. Right. And so that's what we do. If they're interested in coming to us, like, hey, this is how much the competition costs, I'm going to give them the entire breakdown. However, I'm willing to work with you and your community to identify philanthropists that will help support some of the things, maybe a lodging, right, for a local hotel, or, an airline providing some air costs. And again, we'll provide them opportunities to market. So they'll get their, opportunity to again, create another sale, because that's their goal too. They're going to work with a nonprofit, put their brand out there with the goal of hopefully our non-entrepreneurs become like a business class of Delta Airlines or Alaska Airlines, wherever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And so again, you kind of have to not necessarily quid pro quo necessarily, but you have to create value. What's the value between each of the institutions, right? And then just being mindful of your growth. I think every entrepreneur is going to have an opportunity to continue to scale. But it's very important to know what the cost is to scale, and can your operations withstand that, because some people scale too quickly.
Oh, and they implode when they do that.
Yep.
So again, the formula is start, sell, stabilize, then sell, stabilize, scale. It's that type of thing, right? Now you can have maybe stabilization a little earlier and scaling a little bit earlier, but if you don't have the funds to actually scale,
yes,
ridiculous things happen. And give you an example, Gabriel. I had a client, they installed utility poles. I thought it was a fascinating business. Because it's something I never would have even thought of. You get paid to actually install a utility pole. I thought that was done by the utility companies or whatever, right? This guy grew from 3 million to 17 million in under 18 months.
Wow.
And when I talked with him, I said, what's your profitability on the company? He said, I have no idea. And I said, okay, how much money do you have in the bank? And he told me, and I said, that seems really, really, really low. He goes, well, yeah, I think we're not getting the money in as we should. And I said, can we take a look at your books? And we pulled them up, and I'm like, you got $12 million owed to you over 90 days, Some of this running over 100 and over 180 days. What's up? He goes, I don't know. My bookkeeper's keeping this. And I'm illustrating how this can get out of hand. I said, brother, you're out of business within 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And he's like, I know, I've been a little stressed over this thing. I'm like, who's your bookkeeper? Oh, a friend of my daughter's. Okay, let's talk to the bookkeeper. Did you call to ask these people to send you the money? No. Did you? So all we did, Gabriel, is we just started placing calls, and he collected, it was almost $12 million within 60 days.
Incredible.
And people on the phone literally said, I didn't know where to send the money to. I was wondering where the heck you were. Right. And this is what we're talking about, like maybe an operational process that gets out of underneath, but finance needs to be there too. All of this has to be, integrated as you scale. So if you don't, things can happen, and sometimes big things are amazing, and sometimes, like Zoom, but sometimes, big things can happen, like IndyMac Bank. And if you don't know who they are, folks, look them up. I think they were the 5th largest bank. They're no longer.
Yep, that's very true.
So, yeah.
I love it. Doug Brown. Now, Doug, for those folks that are interested in learning more about you, maybe they want to connect with you online, how can they find out more about Doug Brown and CEO Sales Strategies?
So I would type in Doug C. Brown and see the middle initial. People ask me, what does that mean? And I always say it's charming, but, but the reality is it's Charles. And the reason I say type in Doug C. Brown is Doug Brown was a professional hockey player for the Detroit Red Wings. So he always comes up and people get confused. Yep. And so Doug C. Brown, you can type that in anywhere. You can type in revenue growth expert or whatever, and it'll come up a million places. However, my LinkedIn is Doug Brown 123. My email is doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. The company number is 603-595-0303. And Gabriel, is it okay if I give away a resource here?
Yes.
Okay. So we have a lot of resources like you were mentioning, right? You're putting these things out. So I have what we call the ultimate attraction and conversion guide, that all the things that people need to know or should know about how to attract and convert clients at a better rate. So it's an assessment that they could do. I'd like to give that away, and if that's okay with you. And they can get that at www.ceosalesstrategies, plural, / the word guide, GUIDE. And it'll ask to put their name and email in there, and then it'll be emailed out to them. But that's a great resource for people. We've got a lot of great feedback on that. So
I love it. Doug C. Brown. And again, folks, if you forget all this conversation, you get to the end of our podcast and you're like, what the heck just happened? There's so much information. Well, you can subscribe to the Shades of E newsletter by visiting theshadesofE.com. I'll have Doug's information. We'll have a transcription of this conversation as well as a video of this conversation. We'll probably put a blog out there for this conversation as well. So there'll be a lot of content on the Shades of Entrepreneurship website, as well as the guide that Doug mentioned. We'll make sure that is on the website as well. So again, folks, please check out Doug C. Brown's CEO Sales Strategy information. A lot of good content, a lot of good advice on this conversation. And again, please subscribe to the Shades of Entrepreneurship podcast by visiting theshadesofE.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, although I do not dance. So that kind of helps. That kind of ruins my algorithm on TikTok. But Doug, I appreciate you so much coming on the show. A wealth of information. I think we could have probably spent another hour talking, to be honest with you. But man, I'm very fortunate to be able to host this show because of individuals like you come on and share just a massive amount of wisdom. And so folks at home, I really hope you've been taking some notes. Doug, any last words before we go?
No, thanks so much for having me on here. I appreciate it. I had a really good time, and my last words would be that people should be subscribing to your newsletter. I'm actually going to subscribe to your newsletter. I didn't know you had one, Because here's the thing with conversations like we're having, if you're having these with other people, which you are, because we checked out your podcast beforehand, then, you know, people can get this type of information, even if they summarize this information, like, I don't know, use Chat GPT or Gemini or whatever, AI, right? Summarize this conversation. And then folks over time start looking for patterns in these summaries. And, you know, I mean, to pay somebody to teach you this type of thing and you're getting it for free, you know, I bow to your feet on that one, Gabriel. So thank you.
I keep telling everybody I'm extremely selfish because I interview all these entrepreneurs and I get free education out of it. So I'm very, very fortunate. Again, folks, please visit theshadesofE.com to subscribe. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter or Instagram. Sorry. Thank you and have a great night.